Welcome back to CIA Declassified. The year is 1962. The Florida coastline is bristling with hardware, and the atmosphere in Washington is thick with the scent of ozone and jet fuel. October has turned the world into a tinderbox. High-altitude U-2 flights have already confirmed the unthinkable. The Soviet Union is placing medium-range ballistic missiles in Cuba. But high-altitude photography isn't enough. President Kennedy needs more than grainy dots from 70,000 feet. He needs the serial numbers. He needs to know if the warheads are active. He needs to see under the camouflage netting. This was the inception of Operation Blue Moon. While the world held its breath, a group of elite Navy and Air Force pilots were ordered to do the impossible. Fly their RF-101 Voodoos, 101 Voodoos, and F-8U-1P Crusaders at speeds exceeding 500 knots, just 200 feet above the Cuban soil. This wasn't just reconnaissance, it was a high-speed dare. It was an operation born of desperation where the only way to see the truth was to fly directly into the teeth of the enemy's radar. Why the designation Operation Blue Moon? In military parlance, a blue moon is an event that occurs rarely, a rare alignment of necessity and capability. The reason for the name stems from the night into day requirement of the mission. Originally, the planners feared that Soviet radar would make daytime flights suicidal, so they researched the use of ultra-sensitive film that could capture images by the light of a blue moon, essentially low-light night photography. While the operation eventually shifted to daytime low-level dashes to achieve maximum clarity, the name stuck as a reminder of the once-in-a-lifetime risk the pilots were taking. It was a mission so rare and so dangerous, it was believed it could only be executed under the most extraordinary circumstances. The reality of Operation Blue Moon is a record of extreme speed and narrow escapes. Let's look at the facts and voices from the cockpit. Operation Blue Moon was the designation for the low-level tactical reconnaissance missions over Cuba during the Missile Crisis. A quote from a declassified record and a redacted name of a voodoo pilot. "We were so low, the salt spray from the ocean was hitting our windscreens before we even reached the coast." End quote. Records prove that the Navy's light photographic Squadron 62, known as the Fightin' Photo, flew the majority of these missions. Documentation confirms the pilots used Ka-45 cameras capable of taking 6 frames per second. A quote from a declassified mission briefing: "The goal wasn't just to see the missiles, it was to see the Soviet technicians' faces as we went over." End quote. The agency coordinated the processing of the film at the National Photographic Interpretation Center in Washington, D.C. Records confirm that during the missions, pilots flew below the effective range of Soviet SA-2 missiles. A quote from a declassified record from a pilot: "If you can see the palm trees, the radar can't see you." End quote. Logs prove that the first Blue Moon flight took place on October 23, 1962. The agency used the low-level photos to identify mobile launchers that were hidden in forest and caves. Records show that over 160,000 feet of film were exposed during the 82 missions of the operation. A quote from a Commander William Ecker: "We saw the Soviet soldiers running for their guns. By the time they started shooting, we were 2 miles out to sea." End quote. The office used the photos to prove to the United Nations that the Soviets were lying about the defensive nature of the weapons. Documentation reveals that the Crusader jets were unarmed. Their only defense was their speed. Internal memos confirm that the Blue Moon photos allowed the U.S. to count every single missile warhead on the island. Records prove that the pilots were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for their roles. The agency utilized target track logic to ensure no 2 planes flew the exact same path twice, avoiding ambush. Reports show that one Blue Moon pilot found a hidden Tu-28 bomber base that high-altitude flights had missed entirely. Documentation shows the office monitored Soviet radio traffic spikes every time a jet crossed the coast. Logs indicate that the jets often returned with bird strikes and foliage in their intake vents from flying so low. The agency provided the president with daily photo books that were only a few hours old. Records confirm that the Blue Moon data was the basis for the naval blockade quarantine lines. Internal memos reveal the agency calculated the kill probability for each flight as being over 30%. Reports prove that the Soviets attempted to use smoke screens to hide the missiles, but the low-level cameras cut right through the haze. Documentation reveals the use of forward-looking pan cameras that captured a 180-degree view of the horizon. Pilots flew at 500 feet over targets, but often dipped to 200 feet to avoid AAA fire. A quote from a declassified field report, and the pilot's name is redacted. The G-forces during the pull away were so intense I couldn't see my instruments for 3 seconds. End quote. The project utilized the USS Enterprise as a primary launch platform for Navy sorties. Records show the Air Force's 363rd Tactical Reconnaissance Wing was the primary USAF contributor. Each flight was limited to less than 20 minutes over Cuban airspace to minimize detection. A quote from a declassified after-action field report, and it's a redacted captain. The adrenaline dump was so high that my hands shook for an hour after landing. End quote. The agency used wet film processing units on board ships to view photos within minutes of a plane's return. Reports indicate that over 1,000 Soviet anti-aircraft positions were mapped during the 2-week operation. The planes were painted with special non-reflective gray to blend with the Caribbean haze. A quote from a declassified Squadron 62 archive note. Every time we crossed the beach, we knew it might be the last. End quote. The office mapped the exact fuel storage capacities of the Soviet bases via these low-level passes. Records prove the pilots flew strictly VFR, visual flight rules, because radar silence was mandatory. The film was transported to the mainland via supersonic RF-8 shuttles to reach the president's desk. A quote from a redacted photo interpreter. The resolution was so good we could tell what the Soviet soldiers were eating for lunch, end quote. The operation forced the Soviets to move their missiles into the trees, which actually made them easier to track via thermal signatures. Documentation confirms that the Joint Chiefs of Staff used Blue Moon imagery to finalize the target list for a potential invasion. Internal logs prove that the jets were often chased by MiG-21 fighters that could never catch them at such low altitudes. The agency utilized parallax photography to create 3D models of the missile silos. A quote from a declassified after-action field report. Again, this is a pilot whose name is redacted. We didn't just see the missiles, we saw the fear in the eyes of the men guarding them. End quote. The operation documented the arrival of the Komar-class missile boats in Cuban harbors. Records indicate that the planes were equipped with flash cartridges for low-light emergencies, though they were rarely used. The agency tracked the physical scuff marks on the ground to determine where heavy missile canisters had been dragged. A quote from a declassified file on a redacted name CIA liaison. The silence in the briefing room was deafening until the first photos hit the table. End quote. Records confirmed that the Navy utilized sun angle calculations to ensure the shadows of the missiles would be longest during the flyovers. The operation identified the presence of nuclear storage bunkers that U-2s had previously identified as mere barracks. A quote from a declassified after-action fort attributed to a pilot whose name is redacted. It was the shortest and longest 20 minutes of my life. End quote. The agency discovered that the Soviet Luna missiles were already equipped with nuclear warheads through these low-level passes. Documentation shows the Office of Naval Intelligence utilized the Blue Moon photos to identify the exact serial numbers on Soviet shipping crates. Records confirm the agency utilized stereo pair photography to calculate the exact height of the missile erectors to within 6 inches. The agency tracked the arrival of over 40,000 Soviet troops disguised as agricultural technicians using these low-level sweeps. Reports show that the Blue Moon pilots were briefed to look for Olympic-sized swimming pools, as their presence indicated high-ranking Soviet officers were stationed nearby. Internal logs prove that the jets utilized Hayek panoramic cameras, which could capture a 10-mile wide strip of land in a single pass. It's HYAC. I think it's Hayek. Records show the CIA used Blue Moon data to verify the Soviet SS-4 missiles were fueled and ready for launch. The agency documented the rapid deployment tents used by Soviet rocket crews, indicating they were living at the launch pads. Records show that the Navy developed a specific fast path algorithm to coordinate 40 simultaneous low-level runs without mid-air collisions. The most classified portions of the Operation Blue files are contained in Volume 4, the Havana Overflight Anomalies. Over 250 pages are completely blacked out. The official reason provided for these redactions is Exemption B1, National Defense Secret, citing that the release would damage contemporary cryptographic and censor methodologies. And then there's the underwater silo whisper theory. Within the circles of those who study declassified anomalies, a persistent theory suggests those 250 pages detail the discovery of submerged missile tubes off the coast of Maril. This isn't an established fact, but the speculation is that the low-level pilots saw artificial structures beneath the water's surface that high-altitude planes simply could not see through the glare. The theory holds that the redactions hide proof of a secret Soviet naval base that remains a sensitive intelligence matter even today. Then there's the Castro intercept conspiracy. Some darker whispers suggest the redactions hide a decapitation strike blueprint. This speculation claims that Blue Moon pilots were actually testing the feasibility of low-level supersonic sonic boom attack on the residence of the Cuban leader. The thought is that the blacked-out pages contain the telemetry for a flight path meant to collapse buildings and shatter infrastructure through sheer atmospheric pressure, a plan so controversial it had to be buried in the archives. Then there's the Russian defector pickup rumor. This is a persistent one, that a specific Blue Moon mission wasn't just for taking pictures. Speculators believe the 250 pages detail a touch-and-go extraction in a remote, flat field. The theory posits that a modified aircraft landed briefly to pick up a high-ranking Soviet defector who was carrying the actual warhead launch codes. The redactions supposedly hide the identity of the ghost pilot who performed this suicidal maneuver on enemy soil. Then there's the anomalous craft conspiracy, a more fringe speculation that involves non-Soviet hardware. Some theorists believe the low-level cameras captured images of craft in the Caribbean that belonged to neither the U.S. nor the USSR. The theory suggests the redacted pages detail an unidentified submersible object that was monitoring the missile sites. The redactions, in this view, are less about the Cold War and more about hiding the fact that we weren't the only ones watching the crisis unfold from the shadows. And then, lastly, there is the nuclear spore experiment theory. Deep within the unconfirmed files, a fifth conspiracy theory suggests that Blue Moon jets were outfitted with specialized scrubbers to collect atmospheric spores. The speculation is that the pilots were trying to fly so low, not just for photos, but to detect if the Soviets had deployed a secret biological nuclear hybrid agent designed to neutralize U.S. missile silo crews through the air. The redactions allegedly hide the medical records of the pilots who were accidentally exposed during these scrub runs. Was Operation Blue Moon a success? Tactically, it was a flawless success. It provided the absolute proof required to force the Soviet withdrawal. Strategically, it was the checkmate. It stripped away the enemy's ability to hide, making a secret nuclear buildup impossible. The operation successfully proved that speed is armor, as not a single Blue Moon aircraft was lost to enemy fire, despite the intense anti-aircraft environment. It established the tactical reconnaissance standard that would be used for the next 3 decades. Ultimately, it was a success because it gave the president the visual certainty needed to avoid a nuclear exchange. The success is further evident in how the Soviet commanders were forced to admit that American ghosts were watching their every move. It demonstrated that no amount of camouflage can hide the truth from a camera moving at the speed of sound just above the grass. By the end of the crisis, the operation had successfully de-escalated a global threat by exposing it to the light of day. It succeeded in changing the nature of intelligence gathering from estimation to observation. The program's success effectively ended the missile gap myth by showing exactly what was and wasn't on the ground. Furthermore, it proved that human pilots could perform under psychological stress that would break automated systems. It also successfully confirmed that the Soviet personnel were operating under a state of high fatigue, which was a critical piece of psychological intelligence. The operation's total success meant that the U.S. could negotiate from a position of absolute data superiority, leaving the Soviets with no room for denial. It essentially won the war without a single bomb being dropped. As far as operational and technological breakthroughs go, Operation Blue Moon resulted in breakthroughs that define modern fast jet intelligence, such as high-speed, low-altitude stabilization, the development of camera mounts that didn't vibrate at supersonic speeds. Today, this is the basis for gyroscopic drone gimbals used in everything from military UAVs to Hollywood filmmaking. Near real-time photo relay, the operational process of getting film from a carrier deck to the White House in under 3 hours. This paved the way for modern satellite data downlinks used in instant global communication. Low observable flight profiles, the art of nap of the Earth flying to avoid radar. Today, this is used by special operations helicopters to insert teams behind enemy lines without being detected. And multispectral terrain mapping, using different film speeds to identify disturbed Earth where missiles were buried. This is used today in environmental forensics to find illegal waste dump sites from the air. Operation Blue Moon reminds us that sometimes to see the big picture, you have to get very, very close to the fire. The operation proved that technology is only as good as the courage of the person operating it. We are still living in the world of the shadow of the moon, where the threat of nuclear conflict is managed by the constant, unblinking eyes of our machines. Every time a satellite zooms in on a foreign shipyard, it is following the flight path of the Crusaders and Voodoos that flew over Cuba. The bravery of those pilots ensured that the blue moon of nuclear war never actually rose. We owe our current peace to the shadows they cast upon the island soil. The world continues to turn because a few brave souls were willing to scream across the treetops at 500 miles per hour. In the silence of the Caribbean night, the echoes of their engines still remind us that the truth is always worth the risk. The program successfully proved that there are no secrets that can withstand the combination of high speed and high resolution. It remains the gold standard for how to handle a nuclear standoff. Thanks for listening. Stay low, and remember, if you can see them, they can definitely see you. Join us next time as we examine Project Chalice. In the secret operational readiness phase of the U-2 program, the agency didn't just build planes. They bought governments. We'll uncover the facts behind Project Chalice, the file that contains the receipts for the bribes and backroom deals that allowed weather research planes to take off from foreign soil. It was a war of cash and camouflage. Join us next time for The Golden Cup. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.